Test, test,
There you go.
test, test, test. Thank you.
We ready?
Right.
All right. Call this meeting to order. Determination of a quorum. I see we have the 5 commissioners present, so we have a quorum. There's no city council liaison comments since we're in a hearing. Visitor communication. This is the time provided for individuals wishing to address the planning commission regarding issues that are not already on the agenda. Oh, adoption of agenda, sorry.
That's all right.
Get that. The lawyer has to tell. Yes, let's adopt the agenda. All in, do I have a motion?
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Only skipping stuff.
Happens. It's hard to get good help.
Yeah. Okay, back to visitor communication. Anybody would like to address the commission for items that are not already on the agenda? Anybody on Zoom?
I'm just gonna give a roll call here. I see Chris over Zoom. Is there anything that you'd want to speak on at this point in time? That's not on the agenda. Or Joan, I see that you're over Zoom. Is there anything that you would need to speak on at this point in time that's not on the agenda? Okay, no response. I did. I gave them permissions to unmute. Okay, nothing else to speak at this point.
Okay, approval of minutes. Do I have anyone who'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes that were attached as Exhibit A?
I can motion to approve the minutes from January 16th, 2025 meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay. This is a time set for a public hearing on city file number TA 25-01, an application for text amendments to the Sisters Development Code implementing defensible space standards for new developments in the City of Sisters, submitted by the City of Sisters. The meeting is now called to order. Public hearing will be conducted as follows. Staff will make a presentation and commissioners may ask questions to staff. Entry of additional correspondence received into record. Opening the public hearing for testimony in the following order. 1, testimony in support of the proposal. 2, testimony in opposition to the proposal. 3, neutral testimony. Questions of staff, if any, by the Planning Commission. Closed public testimony portion of the hearing, no further testimony. Discussion and decision by the Planning Commission. Testimony. Testimony will be accepted in person and remotely via Zoom. If you'd like to speak, please provide your testimony after you're called. If you do not wish to provide testimony, please say no testimony after you're called. Any questions should be directed to me as chair. When you testify, please state your name and address for the record. Please speak clearly and loudly to ensure testimony is heard, as this hearing is being recorded. Callers will be muted after their testimony concludes. At my discretion, I may limit testimony to 3 minutes per person. I would encourage those wishing to speak to keep testimony concise and relevant to the issue before us this evening. It is encouraged to simply agree with a point made by another person instead of remaking the point. For deliberations, the applicable substantive criteria are listed in the staff report. These are the criteria the Planning Commission must use in making its decision. All testimony and evidence must be directed towards these criteria or other criteria in the comprehensive plan or other land use regulations that the person testifying believes apply to the decision. Testimony that is not directed towards applicable or potentially applicable approval criteria, even if a strong point is ultimately not relevant. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford the Planning Commission and parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the Planning Commission to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Before the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participant may ask the Planning Commission to provide further opportunity to present additional relevant evidence or testimony that is within the scope of the hearing. Disclosures. At this time, I'll ask if any commissioner has any conflict of interest. If so, please disclose the nature of the conflict and whether the member believes the conflict would preclude the members from objectively participating in these proceedings. Julia?
I have no conflict and I'll participate.
I have no conflicts and I plan to participate.
Rick?
I have no conflicts, then I plan on participating.
I
Darrell?
have no conflicts and I intend to participate.
And I have no conflicts and I intend to participate. Does any member of the audience wish to challenge the ability of any commissioner to hear this matter? Staff may now present their report.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair Blumenkron. Good evening, Commissioners, and to those in attendance here tonight and also online. I'm Matthew Martin, Principal Planner, City of Sisters. As introduced by the Chair, what we have before you are a package of text amendments to the Sisters Development Code related to defensible space in proximity to new development, including buildings and additions to structures and decks. The purpose of my presentation tonight is to be a supplement to the staff report that was provided to commissioners and issued prior to tonight's public hearing. So again, supplementary comments giving a kind of an overview of the purpose of the amendments, background on how we got to this point, and a brief overview of the proposed amendments themselves, acknowledging we've spoken about this quite a few times, but to the benefit of the commissioners, but also the public at large to understand what's entailed in the amendments themselves. What brings us here is a goal adopted by City Council as part of this fiscal year to adopt defensible space requirements through the Development Code. I intentionally omitted the other portion of the goal to also address structural hardening. That's another effort that will be subsequent or separate from this process. The City Council adopted the goal, recognizing that there are the presence of wildfire risks and opportunities to mitigate those risks and also improve the resiliency of the community in the event of that wildfire. And within the city limits in particular, given that the Development Code only applies to properties within the city limits. As noted on this slide, we've met with both the Planning Commission and City Council over multiple work sessions. Actually been at this for about over a year, introducing the topic of defensible space, so what it is, its benefits. But it's been since last fall over a series of workshops that we've really began to develop the actual criteria and standards that are before you as part of the proposal. Again, kind of diving in quickly into the proposed amendments. These amendments would apply to all properties within the city limits of Sisters, would apply to all land divisions and development subject to site plan review, and also new development, including single-family dwellings or other structures on individual lots, again, new structures, but also capturing additions to those structures, including those additions to square footage of the building itself or decks that encompass or exceed 200 square feet or more in area. Also noting, in addition to the defensible space standards, if there's a proposal for new land divisions or site plan review, so that would include master plans, subdivisions, and partitions. There is an additional component of providing a fire prevention and control plan, some additional detail to a larger development site that wouldn't necessarily be required or needed if you're proposing development on an individual lot. These defensible space standards are all predicated on identification and allowances or prohibitions of flammable plant species. We've developed an initial list of flammable plant species that are intended to be prohibited on sites or within defensible space areas, but want to note that this is a preliminary list. And the adoption of the list is not before the Planning Commission as part of this package of text amendments, but rather that would be a process separate from this that would be conducted by the City Council, the adoption of that prohibited plant list through resolution. And the concept is that by resolution, the council can be more nimble in adopting changes or updates to that list on a more frequent basis or less encumbered basis as compared to text amendments and changes to the development code. So that that'll provide an opportunity to respond again more timely to new information, new data related to plant species. So within the defensible space area, and for the purposes of the proposal, applies to all areas within 30 feet of the structure or the addition to the structure. And within that 30 feet, there are two prominent areas. First, the initial 5 feet adjacent to the structure, and then from 5 feet out to 30 feet. But within that entirety of that 30 feet, we're requiring the removal of all dead and dying vegetation on the property. There is exception for if there's ecological benefit for that dead or dying vegetation that could be in the habitat for species that are using a snag for habitat, or that vegetation provides a benefit to riparian areas or the bed and banks of a river or the creek in this case. So there are some exceptions, but we're looking to remove that hazardous vegetation. Within the initial 5 foot proximity to the structure, including decks, we're requiring removal of all vegetation except for those significant trees that are present. Significant trees by definition or code already is any tree with an 8-inch diameter at breast height or DBH. In addition, no other combustible materials would be allowed within the 5 foot area. That's man-made or natural. So that could be in a bark mulch, stored firewood, or other combustibles. And also acknowledging that fences within this 5 foot area can be present, but must be of a non-combustible material. So of a metal or a fiber cement or other material that is known to be non-combustible, not wood, as is common practice. So as we move out from that initial ignition zone or initial proximity to the structure, we're going to require within that secondary 30-foot defensible space, no new planting of listed flammable vegetation. So no additional vegetation within that area. It can be retained, but can't be added. And then for the listed flammable trees, requiring a spacing of canopy, be from tree to tree canopy of 10 feet. And you'll see this 10 feet is the standard throughout. 10 feet horizontal clearance from any chimneys, and no vegetation extending above the chimney outlet. And then for the flammable vegetation, a 10-foot clearance of any trees from the side or roof of the structure. And then lastly, a clearance from the ground of 8 feet from the lowest limb of those flammable trees um, to provide that separation from ground or potential ladder fuels underneath the tree. For existing fire-resistant trees, those not listed on the flammable plant or prohibited species, looking for a 10-foot vertical clearance, again, from the chimney, and allows those trees to be in closer proximity to the structure, but that it cannot be touching the structure itself to provide the separation, physical separation from the building. And then, as we move into more ground cover or smaller species or shrubs, looking for a 5-foot clearance from any building for those flammable species. Again, with prohibiting any vegetation within the 5 feet, we'll be meeting that automatically. And then a separation horizontally between shrubs. Then we look at that vegetation that is located underneath the trees, or understory, or ladder fuels is also another common term. Looking for a separation, a vertical distance of 3 times the height of the vegetation from the lowest limb. So if you have a 2-foot shrub, we need a vertical clearance from the height of that shrub of 6 feet to the lowest branch on a tree. So the 8-foot limbing that's already required for that 2-foot bush, we'd be meeting that automatically. But if you have a taller bush, you may have to limb that tree up higher. Other standards included are with roofing material. This is one standard that's related specifically to the structure itself, is that any new roofing needs to be Class A fire-resistant roofing. That's your asphalt shingle, composition shingled, metal roofs, tile roofs, and others. So that'd be for all new structures or a roof replacement in excess of 50% of the overall area of the roof. And then want to acknowledge that there are unique situations on individual properties or individual developments that may warrant exception to these standards. So we want to provide some opportunities for those unique circumstances to deviate from these standards. That could be the use of fire-resistant materials on the building itself, or other vegetation that may be or characteristics of the site that warrant or an opportunity to accept from these standards. Throughout, the exceptions or modifications or the approval of these plans requires a direct relationship with the fire district and provides some approval authority to representatives of the fire district. So I want to acknowledge that we've been working closely with the fire district on the development of these standards. And just also want to acknowledge that we have Chief Tony Pryor, Jeff Puller, and Stephen Lord representing the fire district in attendance tonight. And now we see several different chapters that are listed here on this slide. As with any code, we want to make sure that we're not breaking other elements of the code, and we provide appropriate references throughout the code. So we did add some what are for the most part, references back to the new Defensible Space Code chapters. So this looks like a lot of chapters that are changed. That's true, but the substance of that is not is limited to reference and back to the standards that are being proposed. And I do want to note, since we last met for our workshop, I did correspond with the legal counsel for review of the actual text. There were some Scribner changes and changes to the terminology, but the substance of the standards was not changed. So you may, if you're comparing what we saw a couple of weeks ago to what's in your packet today, the actual proposal, there are some changes, but not of substance. So with that, I just want to acknowledge that at the conclusion of testimony, you have a variety of opportunities, including closing the public hearing and deliberating, coming to a recommendation. You could close the oral record of the hearing and leave the written record open for a date certain, close the hearing and set deliberations for a separate date certain, or continue the hearing altogether. And the options for the Planning Commission on the recommendation to City Council are to approve as drafted, approve with the amendments, or deny as drafted. So with that, happy to answer any questions I can now or later.
Let's do correspondence first. Have we received any correspondence on this matter other than those items included in the agenda material?
Yes, since the issuance of the agenda packet, we've received two correspondence, one from Kathy Russell and another from Kevin Eckert. And I've included those in physical copy here on the dais, as well as forwarded those on to you in advance of tonight's proceeding.
Okay. At this time, commissioners, I'll ask whether you have any questions for staff. Questions will be stated by each commissioner. Staff will respond after all questions have been asked by commissioners. When your name is called, please ask your questions or indicate that you have no questions. Start with you, Daryl.
Yeah. I apologize, this might have been answered, but I missed it. When somebody comes in to apply for an addition or a remodel of some sort, where do we come in on that? Where are they gonna, we're gonna require them to improve the entire thing, the entire house up to standard, or just the area that they intend to infect?
Yeah, as proposed, it would be only applicable to the area of the addition.
Okay,
So we'd be drawing those radius from those addition areas.
okay,
Recognizing that there's a better benefit to it being applied to the entirety of the development, but we're kind of limited to, and want to, recognize that any improvement to the defensible space around a structure is just that, is an improvement and adds to the resiliency.
and I agree, I think it'd be too much of a reach.
And it may be a larger effort to require it, or an unanticipated expense to apply it to the entire structure.
Rick, do you have any questions?
Well, referring to Kathy Russell's correspondence here, she mentioned, fire apparatus ingress and egress into a house or housing development. I don't think we've addressed that in this at all. We've talked about defensible space around a building, a structure, but for these guys to respond to a fire, we didn't necessarily allow access for that in this code. Is that something that we might want to address?
I think it's in the code.
Certainly can consider it, but to Chair Blumenkron's comment, there are other standards for connectivity, fire apparatus access,
Width of roads and things like that.
widths and sizes of parking facilities. So other elements of our code that apply to land division, site plan review, design standards, access, public works and public improvement standards do address those
Those
elements of
standards
the code.
address individuals' driveways.
We have individual driveway width requirements.
Yeah, width and height.
And clearance requirements. And then if any drive aisle is in excess of 150 feet, for example, it's required by fire code and city code to provide a fire apparatus turnaround. So I believe we've addressed that in other standards that are already in the code.
Thank you.
Jeremy?
I didn't have like significant questions. There's one term in here that I kind of understood with context, but you refer to understory vegetation. I don't know if that's a term of art that escapes me. Is that just means just below like window height or below like 1 story?
No, it's to the vegetated environment itself, actually.
Okay.
So it's your shrubs, it's those ladder fuels that, or under vegetation below a tree,
Not a tree, in other words, yeah.
not a tree. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So.
Julie, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I have a couple. One is more of a formatting thing on page 28. There's a space to insert diagrams. Do we have those diagrams?
They have not been drafted yet, and apologize for that. It's more of a simple diagram that I'm trying not to plagiarize from others. But it would be similar, as I've moved back in the presentation, something similar to what's on the slide here today. So just to give a visual reference to show the structure, the separation from trees and vegetation. So my apologies for it not being included yet, but not yet.
Is that something that the
Drawn
staff
up.
will review and approve if we kind of move forward with the amendment?
We would be, I would certainly have those ready at the time of city council adoption.
Okay. One of my other questions is you talked about removing the structural hardening, but we maintained the note about the roofing, Class A material. Would that be considered as part of the structural hardening?
It is a element of structural hardening. It's the actual use of roofing material does not dive into building code requirements. And so why we've separated these out is that we want to see what our opportunities are to or limitations on adopting local revisions to building code standards. But there may be other opportunities through design standards in requiring particular materials. So that's why we've kind of separated these into two different elements, the defensible space and the actual building hardening itself. But recognizing that roofing materials is one of those that does not trigger building code. And so we found an opportunity to incorporate here.
Okay. And then my last question had to do with Kevin's email about the 2 to 5 foot. And I know this kind of came in later, but has there been, or could you walk us through how we created that 5-foot barrier and what kind of set that in terms of, I know we based it on the city of Ashland, talked a lot about that, but are there other jurisdictions that were looked at that had that 2-foot barrier that
Yeah, so
you talked about?
an example is actually City of Ashland, as we've spoken before, is kind of one of the leaders in wildfire mitigation and resiliency. And in fact, City of Ashland does allow non-flammable or fire-resistant vegetation within the 5-foot buffer. But we look to the Institute of Business and Business and Home Safety, IBHS, that's an organization that's the insurance industry, provides research and recommendations for a variety of hazards. And part of that study and the recommendations has found that allowing no combustibles, no flammable, no vegetation at all within the first 5 feet, it provides the maximum opportunity for to limit ignition within that initial 5 feet. So that was that research. We looked to them and found that to be more resilient and in the event of a wildfire. I'll note that kind of working our way back through these workshops, initially we included in the draft proposal was allowing non-flammable vegetation within the first 5 feet, and it came out of a workshop with the city council to consider and include the prohibition of any vegetation at all within the initial 5 feet.
I have a question. Could you clarify the meaningful tree 8-foot or the 8-inch DBH close to the structure? Doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose?
So we have a variety of trade-offs that we're looking here with wildfire resiliency and mitigation, but also our existing tree canopy that we have. So a couple of comments is that it's known that of more mature trees that the actual trunk of the tree itself is found even in those species that are found to be flammable, that the trunk and the bark of a mature tree, it does have a level of fire resistance. And it's in fact the needles, the branches that are the most flammable elements of those trees. So while we have the trunk in proximity to the structure, we'll have the removal of the branches and other flammable materials, the needles, the leaves, the branches, removed out to that 10 feet of separation.
I guess to me, 8 inches is not significant tree. The definition is, I mean, that's like stick of firewood almost.
Yeah, understood. If I may, I could invite the representatives of the fire district as they have a more expertise in
Sure.
understanding the vegetation if they're willing to come up.
Oh, don't be shy, you guys.
Hi, Jeff Polar, Fire Marshal, Sisters of Hampshire Fire District. So a question on the tree diameter. It's a great question. It's a great concern. And I think as Matt was saying, when you're looking at the mature trees, an example would be the ponderosa tree. It is proven to be a fairly fire resistant tree. It's been living in fire for 200+ years, these big trees. So having those close to the building at that diameter, that's the part that we're not too worried about. It's with those branches that are coming off of that tree and the ladder fuels that are underneath that tree that could potentially get that tree to go and burn. That's where that concern comes in. So with the 8-inch, I can't speak to the cities where that 8-inch actually came from or designed. That was the number. I couldn't say that. But as we look at those trees being within that 5 feet, if it's a mature tree, it's proven that those have a harder time to get going as long as they are limbed and cared for, not touching the building and at the distance.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I have a hard time believing that an 8-inch tree is mature, but
I have another question for you, not so much for you, but, so enforcement of this, is it practical? Can we afford it? Can we even do it? And what does it look like as far as enforcement goes?
So initial enforcement will come at the time of land use review or building permit, where we review the landscape plan and we'll have opportunity to review the site in advance of the development, but also prior to final occupancy. And then it'll be the ongoing maintenance that'll be an important element of it. So I think through education and recognizing that these are required ongoing compliance measures, we'd be looking through our standard code enforcement procedures to ensure
Yeah.
it's maintained.
It just
And-
seems like it might be a daunting task to maintain, to keep up on, is all. That's, you just.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a program, not to interrupt you.
Yeah.
A program of education and ongoing interaction with property owners, not only of new development, but throughout the community. So this is one element of opportunities to improve the resiliency of the community. So I see a program of education, outreach from the city, perhaps from the fire district and others, to ensure that recognizing the requirements that developers or individual property owners are required to maintain.
I think initially, I think you're right. I mean, obviously, you're not gonna get occupancy until this is right, but like,
it grows.
yeah, it grows, and 3 years down the road, and you're not cutting my tree down, or you can't, that bush is really nice, it covers this, and
Yeah.
I see that getting more difficult as time goes by.
Sure. And I think that happens with
Yeah.
any development as it matures.
Yeah.
And especially where, if we're acknowledging challenges,
Yeah,
anything that's behind a fence or can't be seen from the public right of way can be a challenge to enforce.
yeah,
But I think it's going to be that ongoing outreach and education that is a critical part of recognizing and informing the community of recognizing the risks of wildfire, informing the community, and finding opportunities to.
it'll be in everyone's best interest,
sure, yeah.
self-interest to keep
Yeah,
that.
I totally understand. I
stuff away.
just don't want to, I don't want to create some huge situation where we're running around
Right,
trying to keep
measuring
up.
bushes.
like, the whack-a-mole, right? I mean,
I would add a little bit to that. Not everyone is within an HOA or has
Yeah.
CC and others, but as a fire district, we're working hard with those HOAs and they're actually in the process. A lot of them have been changing their rules to become fire adaptive. So, and that helps to enforce that also down the road with those HOAs. But I'd say in the last year, Stephen behind me, has been doing an awesome, a fantastic job just working with different HOAs, meeting with landscapers and those HOA committees and the art committees, and pressing the issue of the importance of wide defensible space. And they've been actually changing their rules. We've seen HOAs that hide their propane tanks with arborvitae bushes, and now they're taking those out and changing them to a non-combustible fencing.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of activity outside in the rural subdivisions of
Yeah.
improvement.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah, so, and I would say that's an effort that the fire district has been focused on for the last year is making those contacts.
Yeah, good.
This is kind of amusing that, that I have that's like maybe outside of these rules, but do we have any plans or I know like the Tollgate neighborhood, for example, has signs that say fire evacuation route. You go to the coast, you have tsunami evacuation route signs. We never know where a fire is going to come from, granted.
Correct.
Have we considered doing something akin to that or?
So the plans are there with the major routes, and we work with Deschutes County Search and Rescue. Nathan Garraby, who was just got promoted, but was the lead of that. And the plans are in place to identify those routes when it happens. There's multiple scenarios depending on where the fire comes from. But using Everbridge, which is a notification system, those routes will be announced on how to go, where are the safe havens to go to check in, to let people know that you're safe. But it really, for when it's coming to the city, it depends on where the fire's at,
Yeah.
which way the wind's blowing, which way we want people to go.
Just
But-
don't want to get caught into a cul-de-sac and like, oh.
Right, yeah. So, I mean, the sheriff, the fire district, search and rescue, we practice those scenarios. We'll do tabletop scenarios throughout the year, looking at those different intersections where people need to go to set up, to start being able to direct people and work through those. But yeah, it's very dynamic though, because you just don't know which way the fire's coming or going.
And acknowledging that the city's been involved in those conversations. In particular, Public Works has been engaged because they would be the ones, providing any barricades or other traffic control on the streets themselves.
Yeah, after seeing what happened in Paradise, you start thinking about that kind of stuff. How do you get out?
Yeah, I would say the sheriff's office, they've gone so far as to know that, we might have to turn West Cascade and East Cascade Avenue into 2 lanes one way to get people to go one direction, in that process, you might just need that amount of space for cars to exit, so.
Any other questions? Okay, public testimony. We'll now invite members of the audience to provide testimony. When called, please come forward and state your name and address for the record before proceeding with your testimony. When your name or number is called, please indicate whether or not you will be providing testimony. For those attending via Zoom, we will conduct a roll call to see who wants to provide testimony. We'll begin with proponents of the proposal. I have a couple of. Kathy, are you proponent of the proposal, or I guess it doesn't matter? Okay, well, come on up and. Yeah.
All right, neutral. Neutrals first.
I'm Kathy Russell, 1006 West Collier Glacier Drive. Thank you for asking my question. And Matt was kind enough to also email an answer to that about the egress and the traffic flow. And it's part of that email had a link, and it talked about fire resistant subdivision planning. And I don't have anything I want to talk to you about specifically. I have ideas kind of brewing, but I hope you take time to read that and not just think about fire, but think of some of the other things that are going to be coming before the planning commission and the city as a whole, and how we can creatively use some of those ideas. But my 2 questions are, one, I wanted to know if these codes had a overlapping zone. So that when you talk about the different clearances, when you look at our property and there's only 5 feet from a house to the property, then when we're talking about, you know, the different requirements as far as vegetation and other things, is there overlap or is it just within your property line? And then my other question was where propane tanks fit in. So the big commercial propane tanks that like they're putting into the new subdivision, there's 2 huge propane tanks and they're 5 feet from their house, but they're almost right next to each other in the development. So when you talk about non-combustibles, I was just wondering where that fit in. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Elise Wolf.
Button. Need it.
You have to hold the button down. There you go.
There we go. My name is Elise Wolf. I am not in the city of Sisters. I'm on the outskirts, on the east side, but I am the wildlife rehabilitator here for Sisters, Oregon. I have been here for 14 years. I'm an avian rehabilitator with as a specialist in songbirds. And so part of what I wanted to comment about, I had to make a choice, but I'm in support generally of the plan. My concern revolves around within the 30 feet. And if we go out to the 100 feet, which we didn't cover here today, but that's part of some of the wildland or fire hardening that we're seeing. Within that 30 feet, we have to be really careful about the plants that we're choosing to not allow, is what I'm going to say. So for example, on the list of, and I know that you said that we're not covering that today, so I didn't realize that. I guess there's going to be another plant meeting for choosing plants or?
A separate process that'll be considered by the city council.
Okay. So in Central Oregon, I've been here almost 30 years. We've seen drought for 25 of those years at least. And as our properties dry up, weeds come in. So a lot of these properties we're seeing around Sisters in the Sisters Center are full of weeds and tightly packed trees. And I know we need to do something about that. But when we say we can't plant native plants, and when I look at the list right now, I'm seeing some of our real workhorses, rabbit brush, and I'm not going to include bitter brush. That's truly inflammable, but rabbit brush and big sage, if they are watered well and treated as an ornamental, they can be and cleaned up with dried limbs. They do not have to be a flammable plant. Rabbit brush blooms in August, so it provides insects and insect food and bird food in August when everything else has dried up. So I wrote an article that just got published today in The Source on climate change and birds. I brought some copies for everybody. And what I want to say is that rather than say we can't replant native shrubs in that 30-foot designation, because right now, Central Oregon is losing so many insects to drought and out in my area, I'm in Panoramic Subdivision, people are clearing 5 acres of their property, not out to 30 feet or 100. They're eliminating shrubs. So when you asked Mr. Dickman what understory means, we have a lot of euphemisms being used to refer to native plants. So ladder fuel are native plants. They're the shrubs that provide the food for insects. Insects and plants and birds and other mammals evolved together. When you take a native plant away, you're taking away insects. The amount of loss of insects on ornamental plants is 72%. So that's 72% decline of food for our wildlife and birds when we go to non-native plantings. Now, the plantings we have right now that are being recommended are all coming from the west side of the Oregon. But we're east side Oregon. So our native plants need to be in consideration when we're looking about what we're doing here. And I recognize we're in a fire danger, but we do not want to exchange wildlife habitat. And right now, what is happening in our forests around us, all but 20% of our forests around us are being treated and mulched. If you go hiking out on some of these hikes, around us, our trails, there's only trees and grass. That's a sterile environment for wildlife, sterile. We have 40 acres out in Panoramic.
Please,
We had
we'll need to wrap it up here.
Okay, we had a 25 herd of deer that lived in Panoramic. This was about 15 years ago. We had 100 elk. We're in a wildlife corridor. There's one female left because people have completely cleared their properties of wildlife habitat. So understand, and by the way, an 8-inch serviceberry, choke cherry, crab apple, any of those can be 8-inch diameter and be in a mature tree. When you're talking about ponderosa or juniper, obviously that's much bigger. But when you get down to the small deciduous stuff there. So that's all I have to say for today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Constance, I don't see a last name here.
I'm Constance Chanley Dorst, and I'm from McKinsey Meadows Village, and I'm
Your
the.
address?
Pardon?
Your address?
Oh, 1942 West Williamson. I'm right there on the corner of the high school and I'm in the cul-de-sac, the high school and the forest.
Okay.
And I'm completely for all that's here, that the plans. I've been reading it and getting educated and I love it. I'm also the Firewise Committee resident leader, and I'm also revising all of the ARC guidelines, and I'm incorporating everything into our guidelines. And my question is, as these are for the new developments, when might it be that as I'm putting in suggestions now of all this, will it become a code and when it might be? Because I know I've gotten asked this question and I'm going to get asked this question as I complete my guidelines, because we're going to be voting on it and doing a new resolution of this whole thing. And because I'm bringing in the dark skies too also. So really revising everything. So is there maybe an estimation about if it's going to be a code that they have to adhere to these rules and when that might be, so I can answer that question that might come to me?
Our goal with these proposed standards is to have it adopted by the end of this fiscal year, by June, but
Okay.
perhaps much sooner than that. So we're looking to move forward past Planning Commission to have that required public hearing with City Council shortly thereafter. But I want to acknowledge that this would only apply to new
Got
development.
it.
So when your built environment at McKinsey Meadow Village or throughout the community, these standards would not apply. They certainly can be guidelines and recommendations for you to adopt as a community or neighborhood, but just want to note that this only applies to.
And
the new
it will
development.
only do that in the future too? Or will it change at any point?
So at this point, these standards would not be retroactively applied. That would be a separate amendment to our municipal code that we can consider. And that would be a policy decision of the city council.
Okay, that might be if somebody puts in an ARC application for me that if they want to put in something that's very flammable that I have to say no to. So anything, maybe any new plant going in, I have to say no to.
If it's a existing, so if it's a property that has a house on it,
Yes.
we would not be able to impose the city standards in that case.
Oh, okay.
However, at a neighborhood scale, you have opportunity to go above and beyond what the city or the city development code
Yeah, the art
standards are.
committees can make their own rules,
Oh, okay,
so.
And you should.
okay.
So there's opportunities, yeah, and as Mr. Polar referenced, the Firewise communities and the outreach that the fire district does, there could be opportunities to gain some more information and recommendations from the fire district
And I have
on
been.
how to
Good.
some guidelines to adopt in your existing neighborhood.
Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience? Okay. Yes, I was gonna ask, do we have anybody on Zoom?
I'm gonna do a quick roll call. So I'm gonna give, when I call your name, I'm gonna give you permissions to unmute. And if you unmute yourself and you want to provide comments tonight, now's your opportunity to do so. If I don't see you unmute, or if you say no comment, then I will move on to the next person. Carolyn Dahlberg, do you have comments to provide tonight? Okay, hearing none, I'm gonna move on. Chris Meyer, do you have any comments to provide tonight?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Joan, do you have any comments to provide tonight?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Steve God, do you have any comments to provide tonight?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Last one on the list, Tom Dahlberg, do you have any comments to provide tonight? I'm not hearing anything, so I'm gonna move on. Okay, that was everyone. Thank you.
Okay. Questions of clarification. Does any member of the planning commission have any further questions of staff? Okay. Close or continuation of the hearing. If there are no further questions, I will close the public testimony portion of this hearing. The public testimony portion of the hearing is now closed. Planning Commission deliberations. We have now closed the hearing and must deliberate towards a decision. Our options are to recommend approval as proposed, approval with changes, or denial. When your name is called, please provide your thoughts on the proposed amendments and what decision you are inclined to make. I will continue going through the order until there are no further deliberations or until a motion is made. So you'll have the opportunity to respond and/or adjust your thoughts based on the testimony of your fellow commissioners. Julia?
I'm generally supportive of the amendment. I think the one piece in terms of that 0 to 5 feet, if someone does want to put vegetation in there, what that process is like. Maybe I should have asked this question earlier. What the process is like with the city to get, whether it's on the plant list or not on the plant list, what that is for folks to go through. But that is my main question, I guess. Outstanding thought.
Jeremy?
I'm generally supportive. I know, for example, I think this question was answered. I too noticed that the, when it talks about, the location, dimension, and grade of fire apparatus, access roads, and that type of thing. It sort of kind of represents it generally, and I guess that elsewhere in the code, that's sort of addressed more thoroughly, so, you know, what they've provided makes sense. I think I like a good book with pictures, so the diagrams in there with the code, I think, will be useful to a lot of people.
We'll see how good you are with your color prints when you do your diagram. So I'm generally supportive. I think this is a good start. I think, you know, later on, we may want to get a little bit, not heavier handed, but, you know, heavier in the code, you know, depends on, you know, how fire behavior looks like, you know, in the future here in Sisters. But this is a good starting point, definitely.
Daryl?
I think we have to do it. I don't think a lot of people are gonna like the way it looks when it's done, like a finished product on a subdivision with this plant set up. The landscape, it's, I mean, I think we have to do it, but I'm not sure it's gonna be widely accepted.
I think,
A lot of rock.
yeah, in my opinion, I think it's kind of a secondary concern though at this point because
Well, I mean, yeah,
safety
maybe.
really has to
Yeah.
come first.
Yeah,
And, you know, we're not dealing with a structural hardening, just the,
I totally understand, and I'm pretty much for it, but I'm not sure that the public's gonna like the look of a finished product. They're gonna have to they'll have to get used to it, I guess. I mean, we'll see what the city council says.
maybe there'll be some creative minds that
Yeah.
can make some nice looking, you know, gravel spaces around the houses. and-
Well, for example, like, I mean, there's no point in even discussing what's at 100 feet because there's no lot's gonna be 100 feet wide.
No,
That's out of the question. Even 30 feet is like almost pointless to discuss. So 5 feet away is the number. So everything 5 feet away, because your fence is 5 feet from your neighbor's house.
It's a shift in perspective on how we
Yeah.
landscapes
Yeah,
historically.
yeah, but I agree. We'll just see how the public accepts it.
Well, a lot of the public comes from, wetter climates like the Willamette Valley or even down in
San
California,
Francisco,
San Francisco,
where they're having
Seattle.
fires too.
Yeah, now they're having fires, but I mean, so a lot of people are used to those plants up against the house and everything. Now we're here in Central Oregon, high desert, and it's really not high desert, but, you know, we just have to change our perspective, the way we look at things. And maybe the way the house is designed so it fits better into that rocky.
But even I found a bunch of old pictures of Tollgate in 1980, a few months ago, and my dad was doing construction or something, and there was no trees. All those little saplings were completely non-existent. It was only big significant trees all through Tollgate. There were no small trees and no brush. It's kind of interesting.
Maintenance, keeping.
Okay, would anyone like to make a motion?
I would move that we advise the council to accept this as presented.
File number,
Oh, yes. You hand me that. File number TA 2501 that we accepted as presented.
I'll second.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, it's unanimous.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, staff.
One more comment.
Okay,
Mentioned the fire in California named, which one was it?
Paradise?
Paradise, thank you. And the Beachy fire. We should be really aware that both of those fires, part of the intensity of those fires, is there was large commercial plantation type of forests around those areas. Same with Beachy, and that made those fires really, really bad and hot and intense. And that means what they've done is they've cleared everything out and made monocultures.
Okay, but we've already closed the public testimony, so,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
So
There wasn't gravel here. We're not cactus land. We have a very rich
We're gonna have to cut you off, ma'am. This is getting way out.
Yeah, we're,
Yeah, we cannot let you continue on.
Okay.
because we just advised the council, so.
Not scheduled yet. Your testimony, we have your address.
Great.
We provided. By
Okay.
email notice.
Yeah, and, I'm part of the Orange Community that we probably find. We've got some really great people. Thanks for everything.
Okay. All right. Staff, comments?
No real additional comments other than to just let you know that the April 3rd meeting has been canceled. And the next time you'll meet, it will be April 17th for a public hearing. Am I missing anything that you guys can think of?
Do you have any updates on Arbor Day? Please.
That's a regular, every meeting.
You know what, I'll probably mention it any opportunity I can get, just to bring awareness to it, but no particular updates. Other than I'll just reiterate that we're looking to do a tree planting event, in the southeast corner of the roundabout, where there's this really wide multi-use path and there's kind of a big vacant dirt area. So we're gonna plant, around 40 ponderosa seedlings there and a few larches. You're all invited if you'd like to plant some trees that day. It'll be Friday, April 25th, so Arbor Day itself. And I think at this point, we're shooting for mid-afternoon. Maybe it'll be easier for more people to participate, or maybe it's a beautiful day. We'll find out.
The 23rd.
25th, sorry if I misspoke. Yeah, we'll have snacks. And I'm trying to
Okay.
come up with some other ideas of how to round out the event, and make it somewhat more educational, especially with all the defensible space.
Yeah, I was gonna
Conversations-
ask you, are you gonna use approved plantings?
I think these will be. There's no adjacent structures.
Yeah.
It's not a site plan or a subdivision.
That too.
Not applicable.
Yeah.
So I'll come back with more details next time. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Okay, there's nothing else. We're adjourned.
Question. Are we adjourned?
Yes.
Adjourned.
I was not sure.
He gabbled us out.
Yeah, didn't you hear the
Yeah,
gavel?
I had a whole announcement, whole speech, whatever, fine.
Whatever.
Wanted some more public